Well, I'm wondering about a lot of things, but one of the great things about you that I really admire is that you seem to be able to pull something out of musicians that I, as a listener, or maybe even they themselves, don't think it could have been possible to pull it out of them. You know, I don't know if you know what I mean, but hearing Lee Konitz on Balladeering or on Time, or what's good December
song. Yeah.
I never heard him play like that, and still he sounds completely like him. But I think you were able to, and that's only one example for it. There have been other examples, but you seem to be able to put musicians into contexts where they haven't been before, or they might even not feel comfortable at first, or whatever. And then you get a very personal reaction out of that. And I wonder if that's something that you're aware of, or if that's something that you have been aiming for. Or I suppose you don't think in terms of somebody belonging to a certain, style or whatever. You just put them all together and have them play your beautiful music.
Well, yeah, I think I guess there are many answers to that question somehow, but I like contrasts, and I love putting bands together, and I also love thinking about different sounding people in the music I'm doing while I'm writing it. And for me, it's a big part of composing to think about the musicians and the sounds that I'm inspired by. And I'm inspired by Lee, for like just an example. And I think on those albums, one of the things that sort of worked was, definitely what you said, putting people, maybe put them out of their comfort zone, but also put them in a place where if they trust the sort of material I'm bringing in, it's, even though it's not the comfort zone, they can feel at home somehow and be themselves. Yeah, I think that worked very well on those albums somehow, because Lee was definitely, he definitely felt like a stranger to this music, and he also told me many times, like, what are we what are we doing?
Yeah.
But he also ended up really enjoying it, I think. So that was a really good experience, I think. But I think me as a composer and a musician, basically, I spend a lot of time also listening to my friends and listening to different voices in music that inspires me.
Yeah.
And I've been very fortunate to be able to work with many of these musicians. Of course, it's a lot of fun to be able to put people together that I think has something unique, and I sort of try to create things that are not so easy for like, for instance, I had this dream of putting Joe Lovano together with Jon Christensen, the way he plays right now. And I think it would sound beautiful to hear Joe pick up on Jon's ideas, and I'm not sure, I don't know if it's ever going to happen, but that's just one small idea I have that I think could put Joe in a different context, where you would hear him play in a different way. And small things like that, I think about that a lot. But obviously, as you can hear, it's also a great privilege to actually be able to think like that. So but expression is a very, and personality is a very big part of my music. And I'm not talking about myself, but I'm talking about like the musicians I like to listen to, and also the musicians I like to hire. And it's very important for me that they move me somehow, and they have something on their mind, and
a personal approach.
And I never look for people being good or anything. I'd much rather look for people struggling with something, or really wanting to reach something, even though it's, it might be a thing outside of music. You can hear also, like you say, the way Lee is sounding on those albums. And I don't know, I think that was also lucky somehow, because I went to New York to do this album called The Stars All New Songs. And after I did that album, I sort of didn't want to do any more for a while. And then I had a good friend of mine who was a film instructor, and he called me up and said, "Hey, did you just come back from New York and you just did an album?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Well, why didn't you tell me?" Because I wanted to make a movie about it. And then I was like, well, then I guess I have to do it again. And and that's why I sort of went back to New York, and I ended up calling Lee and yeah, things just like worked out in that way. Kenny Wheeler was supposed to be on that album, and I wrote all the parts for Balladeering for Two Horns. And then on the day that I had to go to New York, Kenny called me up and said he had a swollen leg and he couldn't fly. I was like, whoa, what am I going to do? I had all these parts, and I called my friend Jakob Buchanan and asked him to join me for that session. And we went to New York together, and I just had a feeling and a hunch somehow. I wanted to hear how the music sounded with Lee Konitz alone, without a trumpet player also. Yeah, that was sort of how that album came about, because the space Lee got from the fact that there was no other horn players, that made him interpret, and that made him take up space.
Yeah, but that sort of blew my mind also, you know, before that Kenny was supposed to be on the record. You know, I love stories like that, because I know that album inside out.
Yeah.
And now imagining hearing Kenny play over those tunes, that sort of creates another album in my mind already, you know.
Yeah, sure.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
And I really love that song, you know, what's it called? Color Sample.
Oh yeah,
where you used him in the end, you know, on that other record. And every time his solo starts, I'm about to cry. You know.
Yeah,
it's a special moment when he enters.
Yeah, I was very happy about that too. And I think that was some years later actually. But I was going to be directing this summer course in Denmark called Valekilde.
Yeah.
And I had invited Kenny to come and teach there.
Yeah.
So when he was in Denmark, I was like, I was working at this other record at the same time, and I was like, okay, this
is an opportunity.
The stars are lining up, and it was really nice.
What was it like then to work with him in the studio? I mean, it's only one song and one solo, but still, what was it like?
It was beautiful for me. I mean, it was really, I've listened to him so much, and just talking to him and meeting him and hearing him warm up, and it was really nice. But I'm glad that it was that record also at this stage of Kenny's life. He was getting more fragile in a way.
Yeah.
So I think it worked like this, where it was one song, and it was also like an album where I would put on layers, and so it worked like that, because it wasn't like 10 different takes on 10 different tunes or something. That would have been tricky, I think, at that point. Also, to the question you asked before,
there's another example for that, right?
Yeah, and I think sometimes I'm thinking about if I am actually going to make music for the rest of my life somehow, or if it's like, you know, I'm very happy with some of the albums I did already, and then I think basically what's my drive somehow is the fact that I'm still hearing, and I still know voices and musicians and expressions that I have ideas for. Yeah, I still have so many ideas in terms of putting different people together to see how that can create music.
Yeah,
I'm very interested in music. Basically, what is it like? Why is music moving you? Or why is something touching me and something is not? And
what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's still something I'm still thinking about it. And
did you arrive at anything yet?
Well, I mean, I definitely arrived at the fact that I'm a big fan of personality, and I'm a big fan of people having something on their mind. I'm also very interested in listening, basically. All the layers happening when musicians are playing together. Like if you go deeper than just, you know, the surface when you listen to music, if you start to go deeper and you start to hear and understand why a good drummer is, or at least you start to think about why he's approaching his cymbal or his snare drum or his toms or bass drum like that in relation to the music he's playing along with. Like if you start to go deeper and deeper, and I think that the whole like web of music is incredible like that. That's something I'm working on a lot with my trio with Joey and Thomas. Basically just like being better and better at listening to and understanding and trying to interpret everything coming from them. If that is evident in music, then I get interested in listening. Also when I'm listening to other musicians, if that's one of the key focuses, then I'm interested.
Yeah.
I'm not always necessarily moved. That's a different somehow. That's a different aspect somehow.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking about like how can Lee move me by playing one note on a saxophone, and you could have millions of people, playing the alto saxophone, and they could play the same note, and it's how can he project like his whole life through the horn in one note? How is that possible? That's like that's super interesting, I think.
Did you talk to him about that?
No, I mean, well, I tried sometimes, but I don't think he really got it when we talked about that. He was more like, well, I love playing the saxophone. I'm still working on, working on it. So now we just finished some concerts with Jon Christensen also, and he's definitely at a stage now where his drumming is extremely fragile and very abstract and.
Can you maybe explain why this direction presented itself to him?
That I don't know. Jon keeps saying that he's playing waves.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've only played with Jon when he played like that somehow.
Mm-hmm.
But I was always interested in the fact that he might not play a steady beat or something, but he's still a human being that played like with all the greats, and he is one of them himself, and that's got to come out when he's hitting his cymbal. That you have to be able to hear that when he's playing his ideas. I'm interested in that, but I don't know if that's something that interests a lot of people, but for me it's very interesting. Yeah, and then putting him next to Tomasz Morgan and hear how Tomasz Morgan is interpreting Jon's ideas is for me even more interesting.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah,
that's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
but we were just talking about why does something move you, and why does something feel good and something doesn't. It's tricky.
It also depends on the intention of the guy who is playing, actually, right?
Yeah,
because Lee wouldn't play it to impress you or to make you feel how you feel, right?
No,
he wouldn't think about that, right? He might think about all that's happened to him, or he might not even think about that, but it's still there when he plays. He stood next to Charlie Parker and they jammed, and he was doing these things with Lenny Tristano. This has to be a connection there.
Sure.
It will be channeled and triggered subconsciously each time he plays.
Yeah.
Whereas somebody who wants to impress you, and doesn't have that lineage and that history, he won't get anything across on that. Anything that's just a little bit close to to that phenomenon, I think.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, totally. I mean, like you asked if I came closer to finding a clue to what it is that music is for me. It's many things, and it's still somehow a mystery. And I kind of like it like that as well. It's I'm not such a big fan of like what you say, like facet, like when things are added up or.
Right.
I kind of like the mystery somehow.
Yeah, if you see the math behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see myself as a great guitar player or anything. I've always wanted to create music that I wanted to listen to, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's a good agenda.
Yeah, I guess so. but then at the same time, I'm also I'm ambitious, and I love a lot of musicians who are also very good with their instruments, and so that's been a part of my musical
dilemma.
Dilemma, and also to find my own way in music has been those two things going hand in hand, and oftentimes also kind of fighting a little bit with each other. Like,
I was wondering about that.
I
was wondering about that because you walked along a lot of the guitar players who have been on Vogue for a long time for their very, virtuoso playing also, and very masculine way of playing.
Yeah.
And I think throughout all of your career or history, you sort of, very slowly turned your back against it and walked just the other way. When I listen to you play, like on returnings or whatever, it's as far as it can be removed from a guitar player playing lines over chords, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Right. It couldn't be. I mean, I'm sure you'll take it far away, and
Yeah,
then also you might, because then I love these moments where you just for a moment come back and just play something
yeah.
that's more into that mold a little bit. But then I think you have found a way to really go away from the mainstream, and by that finding your own way of making music, right?
I try. I mean, but the funny thing is that my schooling and my way of working on the instrument has always been via like the transcribing, like Monk, Miles, Coltrane, Bill Evans, Tristano, Konitz, all these musicians I've been transcribing and transcribing and transcribing and playing like 50 Charlie Parker themes and playing all the like it really worked a lot on the tradition. And then at the same time sort of moving away from it when I was playing concerts. So it has been sort of a weird time for me somehow. What I sort of now are settling towards is the fact that I do feel like that the American songbook and the tradition of playing jazz and many of my heroes, I do think that it resonates in my music now. You know, also because I was touring with Paul Motian, I was playing a lot with him, and learning so much from many of the musicians in New York, and you know, for them that songbook is natural. For me, it's something that I had to, you know, I mean, my dad played Louis Armstrong for me when I grew up, but I also played Danish songs, folk songs, and I was listening to other kinds of music in the radio. So it's, of course, my natural sort of musical voice is also very much grounded in Scandinavia and in the north.
Yeah.
I love All the Things You Are, not because it's in the real book, but because I love the song.
Yeah.
I really love it as a song as much as I love Old Man by Neil Young, or if I hear Nina Simone interpret a song, or if I hear, you know, it's the same importance is present when I'm listening to All the Things You Are, or if I'm listening to All of Me, or, and you know, for a while when I was younger, it was tough. I think like you should be able to play this and that on
Right.
Stella by Starlight, and you should be able to do this and that on Confirmation, and yeah, I think it was necessary somehow for me to go through that phase somehow, but it was also very good for me to be able to get out of it somehow. And I love so many musicians coming from New York, and the fact that I played in Paul Motian's group and played a lot of the standard material with him. You know, I was standing next to Paul in so many occasions, playing and feeling his beat and feeling his sound, and it's something that will stay with me always. And I think, at least I tell myself that's also partly the reason why I feel like that songbook and that, you know, that sound is still present in my playing, even though I'm moving away from it somehow.
Yeah.
You know, I love the family tree of musicians. I really love the fact that you can tell that this guy is coming out of this tradition, and you know, he listened to this guy and this person, this, you know, I think that's a beautiful thing somehow.
Yeah. It
You can
connects
hear
us
that.
all in a way. And
It's
it's
not.
also with seeing somebody's parents, you immediately recognize like,
Yeah,
oh, he's just his father
yeah.
as a younger thing,
Yeah,
or you know, it's very close to that, I think.
yeah. You can pretty much right away tell if there's no history. Like, he hasn't been digging very deep. If he had, he would have known that that thing was already, like, you know, it seems like that's a very obvious thing for me somehow. Like the historical layers of musicians, and you can really hear when people have been investigating.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, it's not a bad thing. I mean, I listened to that record with Gabarek and Stanko. I can't remember
Gary
the.
Peacock, the one?
Yeah, exactly.
Gary, Voice from the Past or something?
Exactly, yeah.
Oh
And
man, yeah.
it's such a beautiful album, and it reminded me, but there was so much on it. Coleman, Ornette, and Don Cherry, and Charlie Hayden, and that it was like the same thing is happening in two different places on the planet somehow. And I loved that. I was like, wow, this is incredible. The nuances are numerous, but it's also very obvious that it's inspired by each other somehow.
Yeah.
And that's, I find that very interesting.
Maybe you can talk about some other lessons you got from Paul Motian, playing with him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Paul, that's going to be the high point of my career forever, I think, playing in his band and, you know, getting that call somehow.
How did you get it?
Well, I was living in Copenhagen and I was listening to Paul Motian and the Electric Bebop Band and his trio, and it was like, that was my main influence at that time. Yeah, I basically moved to New York for that reason, because I wanted to be able to hear him play and get close to him in clubs and seeing him. And so I moved to New York in 2000 or 99 or 2000 or something, and I was just listening to Paul whenever I got the chance. I even started taking lessons with Chris Cheek and Steve Cardenas, and I just wanted to get close to everybody who was, yeah. But basically, that was one part of how I got close to the band. But then I went back in 2001 because of summer holiday, and then I wanted to go back to New York, and 9/11 came. So my visa got cancelled, and I had to stay in Denmark. I just let go of the dream of living in New York and playing with my musical heroes. And this wasn't Paul Motian. Paul Motian was way out of reach. I mean, I was just living in New York to be able to play with musicians my own age that I admired. But then there was there is a Danish saxophone player called Jakob Dinesen, who was at Berkeley with Brian Blade and Kurt Rosenwinkel. And Jakob Dinesen had a chance to do a recording session in New York with Brian Blade and Kurt, and he brought a Danish bass player called Anders Christensen.
Yeah.
And then shortly before going to New York, Brian Blade cancelled, and Kurt played with Paul Motian, and he called him up and asked if he could do that gig instead of Brian Blade. At least that's the story I got. They went to the studio, and after one song, Paul Motian stopped playing, and he looked at Anders and says, "Do you play the electric bass? Because I just fired Steve Swallow." And then he started laughing. And I mean, that's not true, I think, but he didn't fire him, but he needed a bass player for the next Europe tour with the Electric Bebop Band, and Steve Swallow couldn't do it for some reason. And so Anders got that gig, and I remember him coming back to Copenhagen, and it was just like completely surreal. Like, what happened? Like, you can't be playing with that group. It's completely... Yeah, and then one day I met Anders, and he said, "Well, there's been talk about you for the Electric Bebop Band," and it was something with Ben Monder not being able to do a whole tour, so Paul would ask somebody who could do the whole tour. And I was just like, I emailed Steve Cardenas and asked him if it was true, and he said, "Yes, it's true, but I think that Wolfgang Mutzbiel got the gig because he knew the music.
Yeah,
or he already knows the music." And I remember saving that email. I was like, okay, I'm going to print out this email where it says that I've been thought about in relation to Paul Motian. I'm going to print it out and make it big and frame it. But then a few days later, Anders called me, and I was at my parents' house, and I was like, why would he call me? And I picked up the phone, and he was like, "Yeah, Paul Motian wants you to call him." And so I quickly got that number and called up Paul, and that's how I sort of got that gig. And it was crazy. I mean, completely crazy. So I spent 6 months before that going on tour with him, and I learned all his compositions, basically all the ones I could find, at least on records, with both his quartet or quintet, trio, and I just memorized it all, and all the songs from the bebop band. And I went to a summer house with my friends and jammed these pieces over and over again. So those 6 months were really, like, I had so much drive in terms of learning because I was going to go on the road with Paul Motian. So it was very good for me. It's difficult to name lessons from Paul. There were so many, I think.
For how long did you play then with him? For how many years?
I think the first tour was in 2000, and then we went around Europe, and we went to Brazil, and I played, I think, a total of 4 weeks at the Village Vanguard. I think my last gig was maybe I can't even remember, maybe 2006 or 7 or something. It was sort of on and off. Like when he stopped touring at one point, he was gonna go back to using musicians living in New York for a while.
Yeah, right.
And that made a lot of sense because there were so many great musicians there, so why would he fly me in? But then he called me actually one night when I was working on my own album called Sidetracked, and he was like, hey, I have a recording session for ECM in New York 2 months from now. Are you interested? And I spoke to, I think it was Steve Cardenas about that, and he said that Paul was always very like family oriented somehow in his music. Like if he had been collaborating with people, he always wanted to include that in his discography.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, that was very nice. And then going to New York and doing that album was sort of like how I started playing with the band again, and I started going to New York to play the Vanguard with him. And that was also how I met Manfred Eicher.
Mm-hmm.
So that kicked off many things somehow.
That's Garden of Eden, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful record.
Yeah, I was just supposed to play on the 2 last days out of 3 days, and then Ben Wonder was supposed to play the first day. And I was just in the studio listening, and then they started playing a bebop song, and then Manfred was like, play some of your own music, Paul. I don't want to hear this bebop. And then Paul had been wanting to have 3 guitar players on his own pieces. So I was invited in already on the first day, and then that's sort of how that came about.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, I was so young. I think many of the musicians in the band were nervous a little bit about meeting Manfred, and I was just basically worried about the music because it was a big thing for me to record with Paul Motian. I didn't even think so much about the other circumstances somehow. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was tough in many ways, but it was also my luck somehow that I got to meet a musician like Paul Motian and play with him in such an early stage of my life. It was like a dream come true, like career-wise, and it's like I definitely felt like I could retire after that first tour. It's like, I mean, I even felt like that after the first gig on that tour. I was like, Paul didn't say anything. We played in Italy, and we were sitting in the band bus, and I was like, okay, did he like it or did he not like it?
Yeah.
And I remember Paul said something from the front seat, like, yeah, there was something with the guitars tonight. And that was it. He didn't say anything else, and I just went to bed. And I was like, "Yeah, okay." So at breakfast tomorrow, he's gonna send me back to Denmark, and that's okay because I got to play with Paul Motian.
Yeah.
But then at breakfast the next day, he hired me for the next Europe tour. So I was like, "Okay, that's," and I think
probably
he did
a
that.
good sign.
Yeah, and also he did it because he probably could feel that I was, young and nervous about the whole situation, and so he always told me to stick with him and stick with me, Jakob, and you'll get straight to the top. So yeah, that was he was fun.
Yeah,
incredible.
How was it then when you asked him to play on your records?
Well, I mean, I had been thinking about that for a long time. At least from when I started playing in his band, that was like a dream of mine, of course, to do something with my own music with him. And I had my doubts because I didn't feel like I was ready. Compositionally and also like playing wise, I felt like I had a long way to go. But then there was one morning where I felt good, and I wrote him an email saying, hey, at some point, maybe during the next year, 2 years, would you consider playing on my record? And I sort of knew that he always answered my emails pretty quickly when I wrote him in the morning, because it was around the time when he was walking around the park in Central Park.
Yeah.
And like, I think 2 minutes after I sent that email, he wrote me back like, hey, Jakob, ... why don't we do it next week when we play the Vanguard, ... Paul ... And I was like completely in shock, of course, because I didn't feel like I was ready at all. But I couldn't say no to that. I was like, okay, well, that's how it's gonna be. Mm-hmm. I started writing music and went to New York earlier than was supposed to.
You started writing music for a record date that was a week ahead?
Yeah, maybe 10 days or something. It was Pearl River.
Yeah, I love that record, man.
Yeah, and like the compositions on that record, I had more or less a week to write, because he said that, hey, let's just do it. And I already had my ticket to New York where I was going to play the Vanguard with him. And I wrote James Farber, whom recorded Garden of Eden, and asked him if he could help recording my album. So it was all set up pretty quickly, and luckily everybody could do it. Just the days before we were going into the Vanguard. That was, I mean, it was really a big thing for me. Yeah, I remember the first song, we were just about to start, and Paul would look up and he was like, "So what's the arrangement on this one?" And I was like, I hadn't even thought about it. So basically, I felt like I was learning on the spot. It wasn't until a few days before the session that I decided to invite Mark and Chris.
Oh, okay.
Because it was going to be a trio album, but then I was like thinking that it might be nice with horn players as well. I mean, for me, thinking back at that session, it was nice, but it was also sort of like a kamikaze project. Yeah. First time I was using a looper also, and we just did one take of that song called Red Hook Railroad, where I'm using a looper, and I felt like I had no control of it, but it sort of worked out, I think. And Paul was very nice. I mean, he also liked the album. We did Pearl River, actually. That song we played with the people band at the Vanguard on that whole week after that session.
Wow.
And that was of course, a major thing for me.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
How about Black is All Colors at Once?
Colors at Once. Yeah.
What's the story behind that?
I think of it as a ballad that almost like wrote itself. And then the title is, I'm referring to this singer from the band Smug, and that's a song where he's saying, I hear they say black is all colors at once, or something. And I thought it was a beautiful title somehow.
It is. I'm actually wondering about composing, because you seem to be able to find these melodies that seem like they were there forever, and also they sound new. I mean, I've said it to somebody else before who does completely different music from you, but I think that's the same with every great composer, finding something that sounds inevitable and still surprising. How do you go about composing? I mean, there's a couple of sequences in that movie, of Balladeering.
Oh yeah,
where you're shown at your house, just playing the guitar and writing something down. How do you get into the mood to compose, and then what's your process?
It's a good question. I mean, I think for sure the mood has something to do with it. Like one day I might play something on my instrument. It might go in here and out here. And the next day I might be in a different mood and I play the same thing and I realize that this could be a really great beginning of a piece. So I think the mental state you're in somehow, that definitely triggers something.
Right.
For me, composing is about finding little ideas that I think I can hear potential in somehow. I can hear that this little thing can grow into something that is not really something I can control. Sometimes those little things do not need more writing. Maybe they need a specific sound from a specific musician, or maybe sometimes they need me to keep writing it until I think it's done somehow. So it's the same goal for me somehow, that to find something like a strong atmosphere or a nice melody that I can hear, that this could grow into something that you could call music somehow. When I started writing, I was training my ears. Like, how can I have this thing now that I like, but what do I need? Do I need a B part? Do I need and so I was, as everybody else, working on my ears to see if I could push my compositions without destroying the starting point somehow. And also push the compositions in ways where the starting point would be of a contrast somehow, but not in a bad way. It's almost like a sanctuary for me. Like, I would never practice at the same time or in the same week where I was composing. It's like, whenever I feel like I want to compose, I always set a time frame, maybe 1 or 2 weeks, where I don't really judge so much, and I definitely don't want to think about music like in an intellectual way or anything. It's completely based on trying to create some sort of beauty.
Yeah.
And that's a really nice state to be in somehow. And I miss it. At the moment, I haven't had time for it since my baby came 11 months ago. So it's. Yeah. I feel like if I sat down with my instrument now and I had the time and
you would have space, something to say.
Yeah, I think that would be. Yeah, I think so. But then it's also super fun to be able to, like, that's something I learned from Paul, like from that session in Garden of Eden, or just from playing with his band. He would call up old songs of his, like on stage. Let's do etude, or let's do drum music, or let's do abacus, or something like that. It should have happened a long time ago. I think he was such an incredible band leader, like that he would color his own compositions in different settings. Like, he was never afraid of trying his songs again and again, and that's something I learned from him. Like when I started composing and I would do a record, then I would tour with that record, and then I wouldn't play those songs again. And now it's like I'm realizing that I have a pretty big catalog of songs that are fun to play. And when I don't have time to compose, I like to take out these songs and see if they are sounding different now than they did when I wrote them somehow.
Mm-hmm. Do you change them sometimes?
No, I've never changed the song actually. Just the settings, like the musicians and the moods. Yeah. I mean, that's one of my key points somehow when I'm writing. I'm trying to get very, very deep into like what is the melody, what is the core of this piece, and what is the interpretation of the melody that I'm looking for. In the beginning, that took me a long time. Every time I had a song, I was like singing it and playing it and singing it again and trying to get to the bottom of what it was that I was composing. And that's become easier for me now somehow to see which notes are the actual melody.
Yeah.
But I would never stop until I got that somehow. So that's probably why I haven't changed anything. I think when ECM asked me to do Gefion, I had been emailing back and forth with Manfred for a long time about doing something. He was also the one that introduced me to Stanko. And then while I was with Stanko, I was talking to Manfred about doing something, but it never really... I was sending him ideas and he was like, well, now you're with Stanko, let's do this for a while and wait with the solo debut. And then at some point I proposed the trio with Thomas and Jon, and he was like, okay, let's do it. This sounds interesting. And that was a very, I think, important time of my career, because I felt like I had to sort of reinvent my own idea of what it was that I wanted with music. There were no Likonis or there were no like soloists that I, loved listening to.
Also, for the past 3 albums, you had Bill Frisell by your side.
Yeah. I remember doing the album, and I felt all these ghosts were in the studio. We were with Jan Erik, and with Manfred, and we were Jon Christensen, and then Thomas, who was my close friend, of course. But it was Rainbow Studios, and it was just like I was like, okay,
a lot of history.
Yeah, every time I touched my instrument, I felt like, maybe this sounded like that guy, this sounded like that guy, this sounded like, and I couldn't listen to that album for 6 months after we did it. I was completely sure that it was complete rubbish. It's never going to be an album. I'm never going to listen to it. And then I was on honeymoon with my wife on New Zealand, and I put one track on one day that I had a feeling was the only one that I could sort of...
Which one was it?
Approve on. That was actually Gefion. And I had a feeling that there was something there that could bloom at some point. And then when I listened to that track, I was like, whoa, what kind of ears have I been listening with? And I really loved it all of a sudden. And I was very proud of how we could go to these places within that song somehow. It was complete a surprise to me, basically. And then I started slowly listening to that album and realized that I thought there was some music that would make sense to put it out, actually. And that was sort of a turning point for me in terms of thinking about myself as a guitar player and as a voice that can stand on my own somehow. And then been developing that with Joey and Thomas also, and I've been playing a lot of solo concerts, and I think it's something that has been very meaningful for me, but it took me a while to get to that point.
Can you maybe describe your relationship with Thomas Morgan a little bit?
Well, I love Thomas, and I think he's just such a gifted musician. Yeah, I don't know. It feels like the sky is the limit. He's got extremely good ears. He both contributes to the melodies, but he's also pushing the music. Yeah, he's everywhere. He's like I have a friend who calls him a socially skilled octopus. Like, he's everywhere. I would think he knows basically all my songs. He sometimes at soundcheck starts playing songs of mine that I don't even remember myself, and I'm like, what is that? And he's like, that's one of your songs. Many times I try to start my pieces in different keys and stuff just to see what happens with. And he's all over it. Like, I think most importantly for me is the heart. There's so much warmth and so much love in his playing. Love for melody and love for music and communication. Yeah, there's just no bullshit. He's completely in there in the moment, 100%.
Yeah,
all the time. It's actually something that's going to be a part of that movie, where the director's asking him if he can describe what's going on when he's playing music. And Thomas is talking about it's like a meditation for him, but at the same time it's also something that can be like a trouble solving. He's talking about the fact that in music there's like a balance, and the interesting thing for him also is to restore that balance if something happens in the music that where things are going down somehow. I love him for many reasons, but that's some of them. I mean, if I'm showing him something at a sound check, you can just see his eyes. He's just going in there. He doesn't care if it's a sound check or if it doesn't matter. Now we're playing music.
Yeah.
That's very inspiring.
You talked about practicing a couple of times in our conversation now. In addition to what you said, you're transcribing a lot, or you have been transcribing a lot. What other daily, common practices do you have?
I have a huge list of things I always want to improve on. For me, my voice and creating as little distance as possible to my instrument from my voice has been a big thing in my practice. And I've made up tons of exercises and ways of trying to reach that point somehow. Just singing, basically, playing one chord and then singing a melody, and then afterwards trying to play that melody. That's been one thing that I've been working on. Also, I would transcribe solos without my instrument.
Yeah.
And I would sing those solos. I had a near training class with Armin Donilian in New York, and he would make me transcribe these foolish things, and She's Funny That Way with Lester Young. And after learning those solos, I would have to pick any note on the guitar, and that would be the first note of that solo.
Yeah.
I would have to know that solo well enough, and I would have to know the guitar well enough to be able to play it as if it was in G sharp, or if it didn't really matter. And that was also a way for me to feel like I got closer to my instruments.
Yeah.
Also, inner singing, I've been doing that a lot. When traveling, I've been having all these songs that I was working on, or if it was standards, I would sing and try to imagine playing it basically.
Yeah.
How does
I do the same.
Yeah, I don't really need my instrument basically to do that at all. It's really a way of getting close to your mind somehow when you're improvising.